The parts of you that make people uncomfortable are not your worst qualities. They are often your most honest ones. There is a version of you that you learned very early to keep quiet. Not because it was dangerous. Not because it was wrong. But because the room went slightly cold when it appeared, and you were paying close enough attention to notice. You learned to read that temperature. You learned to adjust. And then, somewhere along the way, the adjusting became so automatic you forgot you were doing it at all. Think about the last time you were in a room full of people you were supposed to be comfortable with, family maybe, or old friends, and felt the specific low-grade exhaustion of performing a version of yourself. Not lying. Not pretending. Just editing. Staying inside a particular frequency of yourself because the broader signal was, somehow, too much. Too loud. Too sharp. Too real for the occasion. You watched other people talk and something in you went quiet, not because you had nothing to say but because what you had to say didn't fit. Didn't land softly enough. Didn't match the agreed-upon temperature of the room. You left and sat in your car for a moment. Or stood at the sink washing dishes while everyone else had dessert. And in that small pocket of aloneness something relaxed in your chest. A tension you hadn't known you were holding until it briefly let go. The version of you that had been waiting at the edge of the conversation, waiting for a door that never opened, stood down. And you felt, beneath the relief, something closer to grief. Not grief for what happened. Grief for what didn't. That grief has a name. Most people never learn it. They call it being an introvert, or being misunderstood, or simply the price of living among other people. They carry it like background noise, always present, never examined. But it isn't noise. It is signal. It is the sound of something in you that is real, trying to be heard in a frequency your life has not yet learned to receive. What I want to talk about today is that something. The part of you that never quite made it into the room. The self that got edited out not through crisis or trauma, though sometimes those too, but through the slow, ordinary accumulation of learning what was acceptable. The self that discovered, one interaction at a time, which of its qualities were welcome and which ones needed to disappear. And what it has cost you every year since to keep them out. You know the feeling I mean, even if you've never described it this way. It lives in the gap between how you actually feel and how you present yourself as feeling. In the fraction of a second before you speak, when you make a small, unconscious edit. In the way you find yourself performing competence or warmth or easygoingness and doing it so well that people believe it, but you know at the level where performance and reality diverge, that what they're seeing is the version of you that survived, not the whole one. You're not lying. You are living at a fraction of your actual frequency. And you have been doing it so long that you can no longer quite hear the difference. This is not an unusual situation. It is, in fact, one of the most common human experiences there is, and one of the least spoken about, precisely because the editing has already happened by the time most people are old enough to reflect on it. The question isn't whether you've done this. The question is what it has cost you to sustain it. Here is what it costs. It costs aliveness. Not in dramatic ways. You are not numb, not broken, not unable to feel. But there is a particular quality of aliveness that belongs only to the moments when you are fully present in yourself, when what you feel and what you express are not two different things, and that quality is rare for you. You have replaced it with something competent and consistent and very much under control. And the control at this point is so total that you mistake it for character. You think, this is who I am. This is how I am. This is simply my personality. But it isn't. It is your edited personality. And somewhere beneath it, the original is still there. Waiting. Not patiently. Just waiting. The exhaustion you feel, not tiredness but that particular flatness that arrives on Sunday evenings or in the middle of conversations that should be fine and somehow aren't, that exhaustion is not from overwork. It is from the effort of self-management. From keeping something large inside a small frame. From being year after year, slightly less than what you actually are, in almost every room you enter. The quiet grief of the self that was edited out is not dramatic. That's why you've been able to ignore it this long. Carl Jung spent the better part of his life mapping the parts of the psyche that the conscious mind refuses to see. Not because those parts are absent, they are never absent, but because the ego, the managing, presenting, socially negotiating part of the self, has reasons to pretend they are. To function in a social world, the ego selects. It chooses which qualities to develop, which impulses to express, which dimensions of the self to bring forward into daily life. And everything it rejects, everything that doesn't fit the chosen identity, everything that conflicts with the image, everything inconvenient, gets pushed downward. Not out. Downward. Jung called this the shadow. Not a metaphor. A structural feature of the psyche. The shadow is not your evil side, though it contains things you judge as evil. It is not the opposite of who you are, it is the remainder of who you are. Everything that couldn't make it into the room. Everything that had to wait outside while the edited version of you went in and shook hands and said the right things and smiled at the right moments and came home, again with that flatness in the chest that you've learned to call tiredness. In Ion, Jung wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort." What he meant was not that the shadow is morally bad and requires correction. He meant that confronting it requires the willingness to see yourself without the flattery of your own self-image. To look at the parts you've hidden, not only from others but from yourself, and to admit that they are yours, that they are, in fact, you. He was pointing to something specific. The shadow is not built from your worst moments. It is built from everything that was made unwelcome. Aggression that was told to be quiet. Ambition that was told it was arrogance. Sexuality that was shamed. Grief that was told to stop. Anger that was labeled dangerous. Desire that was told it was too much. These are not the aberrations of character, they are the disowned territories of it. And the energy required to keep them disowned is energy that cannot be used for anything else. Think about someone you know, not a stranger, someone close, who has spent their entire adult life being what they call easygoing, who never raises their voice, who never makes demands, who smooths every difficulty before it becomes conflict, who is pleasant in a way that has, over the years, acquired a certain exhausted quality, not because they are tired from external demands, but because pleasantness for them is a full-time occupation. Watch them in a moment when something actually offends them. Watch the microsecond before the smile returns. There is something in that microsecond, a flash of something real, and then it's gone. Managed, filed away. And they say it's fine and mean it in the way a locked door means it's fine. Technically true, completely sealed. That flash was the shadow. Not the anger of a dangerous person. The anger of someone who has something real to protect and has spent so long pretending they don't. The anger, beneath that, of someone who learned that their anger was not allowed. That the room could not contain it. That the cost of expressing it was something, love, belonging, safety, that they could not afford to lose. So they paid the other cost. The one that doesn't come due all at once. The one that accumulates quietly over years as a kind of disappearance. That disappearance is not dramatic. It doesn't arrive as a crisis. It arrives as Sunday evenings. As the slight flatness in conversations that should feel like home. As the sense, in the middle of a life that is objectively fine, that something essential is missing, and that you no longer quite remember what it was. Here is the part most people stop before they reach. And I want you to stay with it because this is where the real work begins. The shadow was not forced on you. Not exactly. The editing happened, yes, but it happened through a logic that, at the time, made complete sense. When you learned to quiet your anger, you were learning something real. That anger, expressed without care, breaks things. When you learned to manage your ambition, you had probably watched it make someone else uncomfortable, and you were paying close attention to what comfort cost and what disrupting it cost more. When you learned to shrink your strangeness or your intensity or your too muchness, you were not being cowardly. You were being intelligent. You were calculating, correctly for the moment, that belonging was worth the price of the edit. You did not lose those parts of yourself. You learned to be ashamed of them. That is a different thing entirely. This distinction matters more than almost anything else in this conversation. Because if the shadow is something that was taken from you, then you are a victim of it, and the only question is how to get it back. But if the shadow is something you participated in creating, through a logic that once made sense and no longer does, then you are not a victim of it. You are the author of it. And authors can rewrite. The logic that once made sense. I am small and the world is large, and the version of me that fits inside the available space is the version that survives. This is a child's calculation. Not wrong, genuinely right for a child who actually does depend on the approval of the room. But you are not a child anymore. The room has changed. The cost of fitting has compounded. And the version of yourself that you built to survive the original conditions has become the cage you carry with you into every new room, whether that room is safe or not. Friedrich Nietzsche, who was not writing psychology but was often doing exactly that, described something he called the danger of ressentiment, the way people who have suppressed their power long enough begin to make a virtue of the suppression. They stop calling it a strategy and start calling it a character. They say, I am gentle. I am humble. I'm not someone who needs to take up space. And they mean it sincerely. But beneath the virtue, if you press on it, and Nietzsche pressed, there is something else. Not humility. The shape of humility placed over something that has been waiting a long time to move. What Nietzsche was pointing to is the moment when the shadow stops being a strategy and becomes an identity. When you no longer know you're editing because you have come to believe that the edited version is the whole picture. This is the most dangerous phase, not because the shadow becomes more powerful in this phase, but because it becomes invisible. And what is invisible cannot be integrated. It can only be projected outward onto other people as the qualities you most dislike in them. That is a different conversation. But the engine driving it is the same one running here. The unseen parts of the self, the parts you locked away and forgot you locked, don't stop being real just because you stopped looking at them. There is a man I want you to think about. You've probably met him. He is successful. He is known for his discipline, his control, his evenness. He does not raise his voice. He handles difficulty with what everyone around him calls grace. He is, by any social measure, admirable. And in private, not in crisis, just in the ordinary texture of his days, he is hollow in a way that confuses him. He has built, carefully and with great effort, a self that works perfectly in every room. And that self, which works so well, is not a person. It is a performance that has forgotten it is performing. What he has suppressed has not gone away. It is present in the flatness, in the slight unreachability, in the way he cannot quite feel the things he knows intellectually he should feel. He is not broken. He is simply not whole. And here is what that costs. Not him, you. Every year you spend managing yourself, keeping the shadow out through control and distance and the careful editing of your own expression, is a year you spend at a fraction of your actual aliveness. The energy that goes into maintenance, into being agreeable, palatable, safe, consistent, is the same energy that could have been building something. Not just a life, a self. And the cost is not paid all at once, which is why it's so easy to keep paying it. It arrives as flatness. As the vague sense that the life you are living is slightly beside the point of the life you might have lived. As the feeling, in rare moments of actual presence, that something cracked open, and the terror that follows because you do not know what will happen if it cracks open all the way. There is something beneath the shadow that even the shadow work doesn't always reach. Something that is not about the parts you exiled. Something about why exile felt necessary in the first place. You were not born performing. There was a version of you very early before the edits began who simply was. Who cried without thinking about what the crying communicated. Who was angry without managing the anger. Who wanted without apologizing for the wanting. That version of you existed. It was real. It was, in some important sense, the most real version of you there has ever been. And then the feedback came. Not maliciously, rarely maliciously. Usually with love. The parent who could not handle the volume of your emotion. The classroom that rewarded compliance. The friendship group where the funniest person was the one who kept things light, and the person who went deep was called intense, and intense was not a compliment. The culture that had particular ideas about how much space a person like you was allowed to take up. None of this was a conspiracy. It was just weather. You adapted to it. You adapted so well that by the time you were old enough to make conscious choices about who you were already, in large part, a product of who you had learned to be. In The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, Jung wrote, "The shadow is not the whole of the unconscious personality. It represents unknown or little-known qualities and attributes of the ego, aspects that mostly belong to the personal sphere." What he was identifying is precise. The shadow is personal. It is not the abstract unconscious, not the dark side of humanity in general. It is the specific individual territory of your particular exiles. The parts that were inconvenient to your particular family, your particular community, your particular version of what it meant to be you. And that specificity matters. Because it means the shadow is not a general problem requiring a general solution. It is your problem. Requiring your attention. Requiring, specifically, the willingness to sit with the parts of yourself you have trained yourself not to see. What lives in there? Not demons. Rarely anything as dramatic as you fear. What lives in the shadow is almost always ordinary, and that ordinariness is part of what makes it so hard to face. The anger that wanted to be expressed in that meeting years ago and wasn't. The ambition that you learned to call selfishness. The desire for recognition that you learned to call vanity. The need to be alone that you learned to call coldness. The strangeness, the particular frequency of your thinking, the specific way you experience beauty or darkness or humor, that you learned to soften because it made the room uncomfortable. Those things are still in there. Not as wounds, as potential, as the raw material of a life that is more fully yours. And here is what the shadow wants from you. Not expression in every room. Not the abolition of self-management. What it wants is acknowledgement. To be seen. To be known by the person who exiled it, which is you. Jung was not arguing for the elimination of the ego or the collapse of all social functioning into raw, unfiltered impulse. He was arguing for integration, the long, difficult, often uncomfortable process of expanding the self-knowledge to include what it has been refusing to know. To say, this anger is mine. This desire is mine. This strangeness is mine. I do not have to act on all of it, but I will no longer pretend it does not exist. Because here is what happens when you do not integrate it. The shadow does not disappear. It finds other channels. It appears as the people you cannot stand, specifically the ones who embody the qualities you have most rigorously suppressed in yourself. It appears as the dreams that disturb you, as the envy that arrives without warning and that you quickly translate into contempt, as the moments of uncharacteristic behavior, the outburst that surprises everyone, including you, that seems to come from nowhere but has in fact been building for years in a pressure system you didn't know you were maintaining. The shadow does not become less powerful through suppression. It becomes more powerful. Pressure builds. And beneath that pressure, beneath the management, the control, the careful self-presentation, there is something you haven't let yourself fully feel. Not the shadow itself. Something older. The original moment of exile. The specific instant, or the slow accumulation of instants, in which you understood that the whole of you was not welcome. That you would have to choose between being fully yourself and being loved. And that love at the time was not optional. You made the only choice you could make. And then you forgot you made it. And then you built a life on the shape of that choice, without ever going back to examine whether the original conditions that made it necessary were still in place. Whether the room that couldn't contain you then is still the room you're standing in now. It isn't. You are standing in a different room. You have been for a long time. And the self-management that kept you safe in the first room is keeping you small in this one. You are still editing for an audience that, in most cases, no longer exists. Still paying a price for belonging to a version of your life you've already left. What would it mean to stop? Not to explode. Not to abandon all discretion. But to simply, slowly begin to stop editing. To let some of what you've kept in the dark come forward into the light. Not to be performed but to be integrated. To be known, first by you and then perhaps, carefully, by a few other people. To discover that the thing you have been managing so tightly is not, in fact, as dangerous as the original exile led you to believe. To discover that what was exiled was not the worst of you. That it was, in many cases, the most alive. If you want to understand why the people who irritate you most are not, in fact, your problem. If you want to see the mechanism by which you have been projecting the shadow onto everyone around you, the next video will take you there. It is some of the most uncomfortable and most useful territory Jung ever mapped. Subscribe so it finds you when it's ready. And if something here stayed with you, share it with the person you think it might reach.